Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Doctors of Running podcast, where we, a group of doctors of physical therapy, discuss the art and science of running and the stuff that we put on our feet. Today at the round table, we have the founder of Doctors of Running, Dr. Matthew Klein. We have Dr. David Salas, and I will be hosting. I'm Nathan Brown, and we are dipping into the mailbag today. We're going to be talking through your questions. We always wish we had more time to do these, but also to get back to you individually. But unfortunately, we don't have all of the time in the world. So thank you for your patience with us in responding to you. And we hope that these kinds of conversations can help at least answer your question and other ones that are adjacent to these specific ones. Before we dip into the mailbag, just a reminder that this podcast is powered by Scratch Labs. If you want to utilize Scratch Labs and you have not before, you can use a code Doctors of Running. We have a new code, which is Doctors of Running. That'll get you 20% off your first order. That means that if you used our old code for 25% off, you now can use this new code for 20% off, and you would get another discount. Too much details to explain why we had to get new code, but it came down to it getting leaked somewhere by somehow. And here we are with a new code, which means everybody who has used it already has the chance to use it again. So the code is Doctors of Running, 20% off your first order, and you can try out some Scratch product. Matt, you are repping a shirt today. I didn't even know your shirt. This is unplanned reveal. Right. What's your thoughts on it?
So far it's been good. I haven't washed it yet, so we'll see how it goes through in the wash. But this has been really, really comfortable. Slightly like snug and really nicely, like gently fitted around chest, and then opens up a little bit down below. But it's been really, really comfortable. I was planning to do a little video review, and then ended up falling asleep with Isabella while I was working on a book chapter. And it's comfortable to sleep in too. So
that's good. That's good. Well, spoiler alert, we are on the verge of launching our first apparel shop. So hopefully I'm making no promises as to when that's going to be, but I would hope that by the end of October, end of November, that we got it kind of rocking and rolling for the end of the year. And we'll have a couple options out there. And we're kind of excited to do that. We've had a lot of requests for it, and we're finally pulling things together in our spare time. So let's move into the mailbag. Our first question is from Netta, who's asking about flexibility. This is what they said. Something I've been curious about lately is shoe flexibility. I find I'm really sensitive to stiffer shoes, but don't quite understand how to conceptualize this, and don't see it broken down in a way I can understand for every shoe review. For example, I notice I feel, quote, clumpy in shoes, and I translate that feeling to a lack of flexibility for my mechanics. The latest troublemaker is the New Balance 880 V14, whereas I don't have this in the Ghost 15. I'm trying to shift to lower drop and have been playing strong, but I'd love some more clarity about this factor. So I stopped buying shoes that make me feel like a cat in socks. Thank you. So anybody have some thoughts about this kind of difference in feeling of this clumpiness and how flexibility may or may not play into it?
So what I want to clarify is, for a shoe to really work with you, it's not just about the flexibility of especially the forefoot. It's also like, is it bending in the same place, in a similar place as where your metatarsophalangeal joints, and where you actually get the flexibility of that sagittal plane or front to back flexibility. So, and the other piece is that not everybody does well with stiffer shoes. And I know that this individual is asking about the 880, which is not a plated shoe. And this might be a personal thing. It's not even that stiff, although as we were talking about this before, and David mentioned it, the Ghost has a fairly flexible forefoot,
much more flexible than this.
Yeah, so there is just a teeny bit. It's not plated, but this is just a reminder that plates don't always work for everyone. If the mechanics of the shoe is not working for you, and you need something that is a little bit more flexible based on the mechanics of your forefoot, that's just who you are. So the 880 isn't that much more stiff, but it might also be that where the shoe is flexing is just not matching with you, and where the joint line is for your metatarsophalangeal joint. So it sounds like you just might need to look for shoes that have a little bit more forefoot flexibility. If there's even moderate stiffness, that might not be the best option, because then you're talking about also, if you're not transitioning off the right way, it's going to feel stiff, awkward. Especially people that might have some sensitivity up front in terms of like your nervous system and how your sensory system, it's going to feel awkward. So it sounds like you just need something a little more flexible.
And when I was thinking, you go ahead, David.
Okay, I was just going to say, and potentially a little less going on. I think when you look at the 880, there's a little bit more sidewalls, a little bit more sole flaring. The foam is a little bit more, cloppy is not the right word, but it's just a little bit more structured there, that the way that Fresh Foam X is. And because I had a little bit of issues with that shoe too. I've kind of traditionally struggled with the Fresh Foam X a little bit, outside of the 1080 and the More, ironically. But the other ones in the past, I've kind of had a hard time with. But looking at just the way that geometry is, they really build up around that platform a lot. And so maybe looking at a shoe that maybe has a little less of a build up for that individual person. I know a lot of times we're saying more sidewalls, more sole flaring, more bevel, more, but sometimes more isn't always better.
Except in the Fresh Foam More. And then in that case, that may have... I never got to try it. So would you like that
it's
shoe?
Good. I like it.
Nice
I like
shoe.
it a lot. Yeah. Actually, the video should be up by now, by the time this releases. Comparing that in the 1080. Yeah. It's up on our YouTube. It's uploaded. It's just a matter of when we release it.
Really quick, before Nathan chimes in, I'd like to say something that less important that I need to get this out in the world in case New Balance is listening. If you named your max cushion shoe the More, your minimal line should be called the Less. I'm just going to leave that out in the world.
I mean, but isn't it like minimus? Isn't that what they...
It is, but I think it should be called the New Balance Less, and that would probably not sell, but...
I just love tanking Matt's jokes just for the listeners. If you're out there listening,
back on track with Nathan actually having some real thing.
We purposely try not to laugh, but if you like Matt's joke, you should let us know that you like Matt's joke. That'd be great. All right, so I'll talk. I think there's a couple things with this question where it was left with more questions than I do have a response. One is, when you talk about flexibility, I think we're all assuming the forefoot, but I also think that some of these shoes have different amounts of flexibility in the midfoot as well. And I wonder if that's where some of the clumpiness is coming through. Like the Ghost narrows out a lot more in the midfoot than the 1080, and the forefoot is a little bit more stiff in the 880 than it is in the Ghost. So there's a couple different areas where that flexibility is different between the two shoes. And I was thinking that for you, though, in terms of how can I conceptualize the idea of where flexibility makes something clunky or not, we have an article out there on the rockers of the foot. And I think that if you were to read that article, it might help you understand how shoes are trying to be constructed to help with the rockers of the foot. Because in theory, what happens when we go through a gait cycle barefoot, we may, just from walking, hit our heel, and we rock on that heel bone. And then when our foot is flat on the ground, we rock over your shin, moving over your ankle. They call that the ankle rocker. And at the end, you go up onto your big toe. That big toe extends, and that's your forefoot rocker. And if you have a mismatch of how the shoe is trying to mimic the rocker when you're running in comparison to the actual rocker that's going on, that's where the flexibility and clunkiness could come into play. Matt had talked about how lining up the rocker with your metatarsals, that would be that third rocker. But if you have a really rockered shoe, which the 1080 isn't that rockered, but it's more rockered than a Ghost. And if you're not used to that rocker and you're feeling yourself move forward on a little bit of a rocker before your shin bone is moving forward smoothly, that's where some of that clunkiness could come. But I would say in general, conceptually, does the rocker that's operating on the shoe match how your current rockers, your natural rockers of your foot and ankle are working? Matt, what are you thinking about?
You brought up a really good point, and I think I kind of am biased because I don't think about this because I'm usually going the opposite way. So the 880, what's interesting about it is they really widen the midfoot. So I found that shoe more stable than previous iterations because that's something personally that I need. I typically need a stiffer midfoot, but not everybody needs that. So another thing to consider is not just how the forefoot is transitioning, but also if the midfoot's really set up for you. And not that there's significant joints in the sagittal plane in the midfoot, there's not, but you may find that shoes like the Ghosts that have a narrow midfoot, like the wider the sole in the midfoot, usually the stiffer it is. Like for someone like me, that works really well. Others that might not, the more narrow it is, and sometimes the softer the foam in that area, the better it transitions. So, and it may be a little bit more flexible. So you may need to look at not just the forefoot, but also the midfoot. Is that something, as Nathan made me think of, two areas that you might want to consider taking a look at, not just the flexibility of the midfoot, or the forefoot, but how wide is the midfoot and how does it transition, and kind of think globally about the shoe. That's a great point, Nathan.
And I think when you're reading reviews, that's how you could try to pick up on some of those things that may or may not work for you. If you notice it has a really nice midfoot and you're noticing that when you get that wide midfoot, that would lead to a more kind of bending stiffness of the midfoot. And if you're like, oh, I like that flexibility, you'd want a more narrow one. And when we talk about stability, inherent stability, and stability is not good or bad, it just is. When we talk about stability, a wider midfoot is going to often be painted, whether intentional or not, in a positive light because it adds some guidance and structure, but that's not necessarily the point of that we're trying to make. So for you, when you're reading reviews, you can look for that width of the midfoot, and maybe that could be a factor for you that could matter. David, did you have something?
Yeah, I think just looking at the general construction of the shoe, and this is, further down the line than anything that we're mentioning, but when we're looking at forefoot flexibility, looking at the construction of the forefoot itself. And so one thing that the Ghost has traditionally always had is deep flex grooves through the forefoot. Yes. And so there are some models, there's like some Mizuno models out there. There's some Asics models like where that's still, in their component and in their line of footwear. And if you do respond to having a little bit more flexibility built into the shoe that way, in that outsole pattern where it kind of cuts into the midsole, that could be something to look for as well. Not necessarily stiff versus, flexible, but looking at the actual component of how it is itself.
One last thing that I want to just add from a clarity of term perspective is there are two different ways that the word stiffness is utilized when talking about footwear. One of them is bending stiffness. So how hard is it for different components of the shoe to be flexed and bent longitudinally? The other kind of way that stiffness is utilized is in foam compounds. A more stiff midsole is a less compliant midsole. So higher stiffness in a compression standpoint is different than what we're talking about. We're primarily talking about right now this bending stiffness and how that plays into a rocker's performance underfoot, whereas stiffness as it comes to midsole components and compliance, that's a totally different term. And most people don't care that I just said that, and that's fine. But if you were like, wait, which one are they talking about? We are talking about longitudinal bending stiffness at different parts of the shoe, not talking about the stiffness of a midsole when it comes to the amount of cushioning.
And that midsole stiffness, by the way, in terms of longitudinal, can also be like, torsional stiffness as well.
Yes.
I just had a brain fart.
Perfect. Well, let's move on to our next question. This one's from Brendan, and he asks about pain from shoes. It says, I'll be getting treatment for flat feet / plantar fasciitis, which are causing me aches and pains in my feet, legs, and hips. I'm beginning to feel that my cushioned Hoka trainers are part of the problem. I wear an insert with them, but they feel hard at times on the foot surface as I walk in them. I know other people have had this experience from comments about flat feet and Hoka trainers on Reddit. What thoughts do we have here? Matt, go ahead.
First, to clarify, and not Brendan, not to talk against you, flat feet is not a pathology. It's just a foot position. There are people that develops over time. There are people that are born with that. It is not necessarily associated with plantar fasciitis. In fact, actually having a higher rigid arch actually has a greater risk for it. I'm not saying people can't get it. Just know that foot position doesn't necessarily mean, I'm going to have, this is a pathology. So I want to clarify that there's positives and negatives to having that foot position. So just be aware of that. Having plantar fasciitis sucks, though. That is a challenging thing to treat. I don't want this to come off negative, but know that time is an important factor and adequate management. So it sounds like you are getting treatment, which is great. So hoping you have a really good provider or somebody that you're working with for that. I'm curious to get your two opinion because there's some things I've heard the same. And I have a similar experience, and so this might be very biased, so please check me on this, that with certain max cushion shoes, they end up feeling much harder to me because I'm someone that needs a little bit more stability. When I'm on softer surfaces, my joints stiffen up and I can feel this, and it actually makes the shoe feel firmer than it really is. Like if I'm walking in them, it's like, and I'm putting less force through it, or I'm like, I've just done some strength training and kind of got some higher tone in my foot muscles, the shoe actually feels softer. But when I haven't done that and am kind of like, I don't know how to describe loosey-goosey, like I'm just a little more flexible that day for whatever reason, the shoe will feel harder, not necessarily because the shoe is, but because I'm stiffening up more. And I know those. I know there's a couple people on off topic. Those that have flatter feet oftentimes are a little more sensitive to sidewalls, which are really common in Hokas. And I'm not sure if they're feeling not necessarily the midsole firmness or stiffness, the midsole stiffness or firmness as we just talked about, or if they're just having the sidewalls just push up against them. I'm just throwing stuff out here, but curious to know what you two think on this.
Or a mix of both. I mean, they're putting insoles in these too on top of that, right?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, because
so you're adding an additional stiffening agent, which is what insoles really frequently do.
Yeah, that was the first thing I was thinking of, was especially through the midfoot, those sidewalls can be a little aggressive in the Hokas, traditionally speaking, and they've gotten a little bit better in recent years, but like it's always been a pretty narrow fit through that area, even though there was a wide cross-sectional area of the platform, but the actual upper used to undercut that medial longitudinal arch pretty hard.
Right.
And so you put an insole on top of that, and now you're just like really kind of stacking up in that inverted position. Well, relative, just the feeling of it, proprioceptive feeling, whether or not you're actually in that position. But you could argue that you're kind of double stacking against it. And then like now your foot's actually on extra tension down there and even more prone to things like shin splints if it can't splay and shock absorb, which flat feet in theory should do pretty well at. So you're kind of taking your one superpower away. And just,
that's a good point.
Yeah. So that's kind of more what I was thinking of. If you're just like double stacking too many things.
Yeah. I agree there. I think that uniquely, I think that Hoka is not. I think that the conversations about Hoka are out there in regards to flat feet. I do think a lot in part due to what you talked about, David, with the sidewalls. But I don't think your experience in finding a certain cushioning stiffness or firmness leading to plantar foot pain, I think that can be spread across any sort of shoe brand. It just depends on who you are. And I think that there is a lot right in that little moment that has not been discovered in terms of research. But I know for me, over the last 5 years, pretty much any Mizuno Wave Rider or like the Wave Neo stuff, I would get plantar foot pain every single run that I would do them on. It wouldn't lead to ongoing pain because I would stop running in them. But it was something about the specific stiffness of that shoe. It had nothing to do with rockers because it was a bunch of different rockers and everything. But the stiffness of that shoe and the cushioning amount, the compliance, just hit me exactly wrong. And I think that it may have something to do with the type of vibration that shoe cushioning goes through, as well as the tissues in your body, and if those match up or if they don't. Like there's a lot of stuff in that realm that I think could be playing a role as well. And so in this realm for this person, I think it's good that you're doing treatment because that's the main thing. But if you're noticing that a combination of a shoe and some sort of insert is leading to continual pain, I would just try, it sounds silly, but I would just try something else. I would move away from the Hoka for a while, not because Hoka is bad, but it's not working for you. If it's continuously feeling too firm, I would go find something that, and you're saying like, I wish it was something more soft feeling. I would go find a more soft shoe. We were just talking about New Balance, the 1080 and the More both have much softer foams than even the 880 does. So you could get a much softer foam underneath your foot and maybe just see if that changes your experience and how it is underfoot.
I will also say there are definitely, and this is not a knock on the brands, there are certain brands that just take orthotics and insoles a lot better than others. New Balance and Brooks typically on average do pretty well. Hoka sometimes, not always as good. So making sure that the shoe that you're utilizing is actually designed to take one is really important, because most shoes are really designed with the stock insole, and they don't always think about, hey, what happens when you put this additional thing in there and you don't know how it's going to react, which is why we always talk about going, if you're going to use an insole, make sure you have a shoe that can take those really well, because you don't know how those two are going to interact. So that might be something, as Nathan mentioned, they just might not be, this might not be the best combination for you. So if you really need that new insole, you might want to look at other footwear that's potentially softer, or just ones that are actually designed to take those.
Yeah. I've got a question for you. So in this question from Brendan, it says, I'll be getting treatment for flat feet, plantar fasciitis, which is causing aches and pains in my feet, legs, hips. So he's kind of explaining a bottom-up approach and philosophy to his foot pain. there's other people who talk about a top-down approach where issues at your hip lead to pain in your foot. Can we talk about those concepts for a minute and how we can conceptualize where pain originates from and how the body is interrelated?
I'd be careful to use the phrase where pain is originated from, just because, and these two know this, but the pain is far more complicated than just tissue injury. You can have pain with tissue injury. You can also not have pain with it. Is a far more complex, and as we're understanding, even emotional response doesn't do justice to what that is. So be cautious using that. We have to be cautious using that. I will say it is possible for it to be top down or bottom up. It really depends. I know we say the phrase, it depends all the time, but there are compensatory things that can happen. You just have to figure out, is what you think actually occurring, or are there a couple things going on, which also happen? Or is it really that the plantar fasciitis or apathy, which is the better term, is actually causing compensations up higher in terms of like, you're painful, so you're trying to go through a different range of motion to avoid it, and that's putting stress in different areas? Or is it the other way around? We can't say that because we haven't evaluated the person, but that's a complex problem that hopefully you can solve with a really mindful and very compassionate healthcare person that can help you kind of dive into a subjective and objective exam that's appropriate to go, which one is it? But it can go both ways. It can also be totally unrelated. So yeah.
Yeah, just to kind of answer like Nate's question as well, like to clarify like what that top to bottom or bottom to top type of methodology means. It's basically saying that something that you have on one end or the other. So like, let's say if you're going from bottom up, something's going on at the foot or the ankle that is now affecting other things above. And this is, again, just methodology. I want to preface this by saying nothing acts in isolation. And so it's usually a combination of stuff. I hate, like, it's very rarely just one thing. But when we look at the foot and ankle, like, let's say, okay, well, it's in a flat foot position. You have more of a collapse of the arch. You're probably a little bit more everted at the ankle. Might have a little bit of an external rotation torque on the tibia, internal rotation torque on the femur. That puts pressure on the hips. And then it kind of does like this little spiral effect as you go up the leg. Usually the same argument is the exact same from the top down. So to me, it doesn't really matter that much from a methodology standpoint of where you're looking, as long as you're looking at everything. Because it's the same thing. Or they say, okay, well, your hip's not controlled well and you're internally rotating and controlling there, and that's putting pressure on that side of the knee, and that's rotating the tibia, and that's causing you to collapse more at your ankle. So it kind of just two ways of saying kind of the same thing. And and even that is still not the case for everyone. You know, it's just kind of getting down to the nuts and bolts of things and looking at just what are the impairments, what are you having a hard time with, and what can we make better?
I think that's what it comes down to, because you can't ever really know what is causing the other, because they usually occur together. And so then people get hung up on trying to determine, it's just treat your hip to fix your foot, or just treat your foot to fix your hip, or whatever it is. And as you just finished with, David, I think just reiterating the fact that hopefully you can find a provider who's able to look at all of it and determine where do you have significant limitations in strength and mobility and flexibility of musculature, whatever it happens to be, so that you can just address the things that are actually going on for you and not just from a philosophy. Because I think individualized treatment plan is way more appropriate than finding some stock program based off of a theory. And that's kind of where I was hoping we'd go with that question. It's probably not fair that I'm asking questions that I want them to go a certain way, but that's definitely where I wanted to go. So thank you, David and Matt. You're going to say something, Matt?
My brain just stopped again. What was I
going to say? Oh, Nate wanted that. Just masterminding this whole thing.
Yeah. I will say that, top down versus bottom up, I'm not sure if it 100% matters, because when you just do it, like, I'm presenting on and my interest has shifted in my research to like return to sport and trying to figure out how to get people back. And I think early on, it's okay to really focus on where the symptoms are coming from in terms of like calming things down and like, letting things heal and things like that. But as you get back to return to sport, you should not be focusing only on one area. You need to focus on the entire limb, the entire body, because if you want to optimize things, you need to you can't do the single piece. You got to put that piece back and work the whole thing. So, it's I don't know if it's necessarily necessary to find like, oh, it's coming from here. It's like, well, treat the thing and then integrate everything together and get everything working well and just get back to it. I don't know if we need to necessarily make it that complicated, even if that's even necessary. But that's just a thought.
I think it's great. What this makes me think about is we've done periodic condition episodes where we really dive deep into conditions, and it would be probably good to revisit plantar fascia pain and really diving into the condition of plantar fasciopathy or plantar fasciitis specifically. Because we've talked about plantar foot pain a lot and all the different causes, but I think people do deal with plantar fascia pain a lot, and it would be good to dive into that. So tally that for a future episode. We're going to move on to our next question. This is from Jennifer, who asks for a shoe recommendations. And they say, hi, I have a half marathon coming up, which is on mostly well-groomed carriage trail with some single track out and backs. They run about a 10 to 11 minute per mile pace. And they used to be a Kinvara loyalist, but they're finding that they're not as comfortable on the longer runs. They also have a Brooks Ghost right now, but find that underwhelming. They're a heel striker. They say that their feet also run wide, so they're hoping to have a women's wide option or maybe a men's version that would work. So she's considering something from Topo, but not sure what options would be best. But she also says that her preferences are usually towards shoes that feel responsive and light and not clunky, and also has a couple injury history of shin splints, knee pain that kind of come and go. So looking for a shoe recommendation for this kind of half marathon.
I have two thoughts, and I'm curious to know what you two think. So my immediate bias hearing this was thinking about the Topo Mountain Racer 3, but I can't remember if that comes in a wide or not. And the reason I thought about it is because it's been a shoe that I have really enjoyed, even both on long, easy efforts. It's lower drop. It's nicely rocker, just a teeny bit stable, which can also be helpful for certain people. And then it's just a little bit wider without being sloppy. It's a really, really, really nice fit. I've really enjoyed it. It's one of my favorite trail shoes. And I think it can also handle a variety of trail terrain. The only challenge is I don't remember if it comes in a wide.
Which may not matter for Topo as much because they're pretty wide to begin with. Yeah, it might not matter as much if it does specifically come in wide.
I don't remember how low, like the men's sizing. I don't know how some companies have this huge sizing rung of like they go into really like smaller men's sizes like 6, 6.5, 7, which makes it for women looking for a wider shoe can make that little transition a little easier. I just don't remember how small it goes. But the other shoe I was thinking about, which we've had some interesting experience, and the Kinvara made me think about this, is the Innovate Trailfly series, which do come in a wide, and I've really enjoyed those. But the Roadfly we just reviewed as well, and I really expected not to like them like this. And both those shoes I've really actually ended up enjoying, and they're on the lighter side. They've got pretty good traction, but not so much that you can't use them on road, the Trailfly, and they do actually come in wide. So I'd say Innovate actually might get a shout out here to go, hey, look at the Trailfly. That might be an option, especially from the Kinvara standpoint. And they are so durable. They're really durable. Like, I'm very impressed how they've held up against how would we describe what I do to shoes? My destroyer feet.
Yeah. Just the destroyer.
Yeah. So I throw out, the Innovate Trailfly series and potentially the Topo Mountain Racer 3 if it comes in a wide, which I can't remember. What do you two think?
I just want to like define a carriage trail.
Yeah. Like crushed gravel, like finely crushed gravel. Like really. Okay. Yeah.
I was trying to figure out like packed dirt, crushed gravel. Like, what are we talking here? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nathan, did you have more experience with this terrain?
It'd be similar to what we have with the green circle around here. Maybe even more finely crushed. I don't know exactly what they're doing, but I actually lean towards doing a road shoe instead of a trail shoe for this. I think that if it's mostly that with a little bit of, single track that's not too technical, I think you could just get a much lighter, more comfortable shoe than what you would get with the trail models. That's kind of where I was leaning. So when I was thinking about Topo, I was thinking about some of their trainers, and knowing they like the Kinvara, I was like, maybe the PIBA based midsole of the Cyclone or even the Spectre, depending on how they would deal with the heel flare. Like those could be two real options for a half marathon like this. I think just having a couple hours on your feet in those shoes might be okay. I know, David, you've taken the Cyclone 2 for long runs before, and so you might be able to speak to that more. But if that would be too low, the Spectre is a little bit higher stack and might have a little bit in there. But I don't necessarily think a trail shoe is needed. And so that was a couple of the ones from Topo that I was thinking about. David, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I honestly, I was like, why not just a peg trail? Like,
sure, yeah,
get something that's a little bit of an all-terrain type shoe that can do a little bit of everything. Knowing that they like the Kinvara, though, it's like, okay, well, you like something that's a little bit more flexible, a little bit lower to the ground. So trying to find something that respects that. And, I was kind of having a little bit of a hard time thinking of something. I mean, like the first thing that comes to mind for me is the Ultra Mont Blanc carbon, but then because it's a little bit wide, it's a little bit lower, it's light, it's responsive, but it's a little stiff, because it is plated.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing where like that kind of takes it off the list. Trying to think of something that has a little bit more flexibility up front, and I kind of just come back down to some of those types of shoes, even something like a Brooks Ghost. I mean, I know they said they were a little underwhelmed by that, so it's like you look for something a little bit lower profile within those lines of shoes. And I mean, even something like a Puma, shoot, why am I blanking on the name? Puma.
You blank it every time. Velocity.
I'm so sorry. Velocity. You're right. Velocity Nitro
every
3.
Time.
But that one has good traction underfoot, and it's decently responsive, and it's in like the 9-ish ounce range. Like you could totally run crushed gravel and a little bit of single track in that.
Yep.
I mean, especially if it's not that technical. I don't think it's that technical based on what it sounds like.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm kind of leaning that way. I feel like you don't really need to go and do something super intense,
If you go Puma, definitely would need to find wide or half size up if you need a little more space.
Narrow. You're right.
Because they run a little narrow. So that would be the one thing there. I think, the other shoe, if it comes in a wide as well, I think going back to one of David and my kind of more underrated shoes, but the Tri-Nusa, because it's a little bit more stable and it would be kind of Kinvara-esque, but has just a little bit more cushioning to it. I think that could also be an option. And because of the slightly lower profile, if there is a little bit of technical nature, like it wouldn't really mess with you.
And that outsole is very durable.
Super
and it's
good.
probably durable enough to handle some like crushed gravel or things like that. More technical trail, no, but I think I agree that might also be something worth trying.
Right. But I do like the peg trail idea because it's not that crazy of an outsole. And if this person is willing to go try a Ghost, they're not too married to the Kinvara because those are pretty different shoes. They're still the 4-foot flexibility.
And it's like right in the middle between the two.
Yeah, I was gonna comment that like, oh, maybe not the peg trail because it's like moderately higher drop, but then the Ghost is too, and I'm like, oh, all right, never mind.
Even the like Hoka Challenger isn't that heavy, right?
No, it's not terrible.
Challenger ATR isn't that like 910, something like that.
Yeah,
so that's not too bad. Yeah. I'm just pulling it up right now to see.
I keep looking behind me because I'm like
9.7 according to RW.
Yeah. So, it's a pretty solid option.
Yeah. And that's like an all-terrain shoe that you could hit some pretty hard trails in actually.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that if the main part of the trail is too fine and too groomed, a really more rugged, higher lugged depth of lug trail shoe is not going to be fun to run a half marathon in. No. It would feel unnecessary on that. So that was my only thought. So if you do go trail, it's got to be one of those all-terrain road to trail type trail shoes and not something with deep lugs. Like even
the Evo
Ultra Glide. Like I wouldn't want to do that. Right.
Evo Jaws.
Do you remember the Jaws?
Yeah. The only weird part about that shoe is every time you put it on, you heard like, Donna. I'm just kidding.
All right. This is good. Let's move on to our next question.
I really hope Universal is not listening to this. We about to get a cease and desist real fast.
I'm not the one that designed the shoe, so I didn't name it. It's not my fault.
This is a question that I think admittedly was a little tough for us to come up with recommendations, so we might be kind of brief on this. But this is a question from Sharon. She's a physical therapist, running specialist. Awesome that you're joining with us. We'd love to learn from you too. They're also a certified coach and gait analyst who owns their own practice. They currently have a client with a Haglunds deformity. And while they've addressed running shoe recommendations, this person also has a need to dress up for work. So looking for casual and dress shoe recommendations that will accommodate the posterior heel. So we had talked about some, but let's walk through those and see what else comes up.
You two mind if I go first, since I probably have the most significant Haglund deformity on both feet, and so this is something I comment on all the time.
And tell us what a Haglund is, by the way, for the people who may not know. So a Haglund
deformity is also affectionately known as a pump bump. So on the back of the heel, where your Achilles tendon goes into the calcaneus bone, in some people that can get a little flared up, or it can just be large. So bone, this thing called Wolff's Law is that bone will respond to the stress placed upon it, and some people, like myself, that can grow out. Some people can also have like little bits of inflammation in that area that can cause it to kind of swell or get irritated and make it a little bit sensitive. Those of us that there are sensitivities back there, a hard heel counter, which is typically used, it's a hard plastic or some other kind of stiffening agent in the upper part of the heel. That's typically used to create a little bit more structure and to hold the heel well. Those who have Haglund deformities may not do well with those because that hardness can be very irritating to a sensitive heel. So that's something I always comment on, going, hey, how stiff is this? If you like a stiff heel counter, you're going to like this. If not, and if you were sensitive, what's going to be your response? So that's something I comment on. So I'm always in the same boat looking for that, because a lot of dress shoes have no heel collar padding and they're really stiff and they can be really irritating. And I've had some pretty solid limping after casual shoes. So I have a couple options. The only problem with these, though, is that if the Haglund deformity, which a lot of times a tight calf or excessive pulling there can irritate this, if the issue is being driven by calf stiffness, this is where we're going to struggle a little bit, because most of the shoes that have flexible heel counters are also zero drop or minimal shoes. So it's a little bit of a challenge. You've asked a really great question that I'm still struggling with, to be honest, and still searching. So the two companies that really come to mind is, I'm just doing it again. We just talked about this. My brain just
You're thinking
totally
of Zero.
stopped. Yeah, sorry.
I'm
Zero
putting
shoes,
words in his mouth, but he's thinking of Zero.
Thank you. So Zero Shoes and Vivo Barefoot are the two companies that make minimal shoes, but they also make leather dress shoes that I've used extensively, especially from Zero, which is a favorite of mine, that have completely flexible heels with no counters in them. And they look really nice. They're a little expensive, but they are great and can definitely pass, as I've done many, many formal occasions in them, and they have a flexible heel counter. You just got to make sure that the person appropriately transitions into them. I like being in a more minimal state throughout the rest of the day. Not everybody's used to that, so you have to transition and if they have issues with the Haglund related to limited calf mobility, that might be a little bit challenging. Curious if you two have any other suggestions for more like traditional heel drop kind of stuff. I know there's a company called Kuru that makes some shoes, and they claim like, oh, it's like supposed to take pressure off the heel. I haven't tried their formal line and don't know if they've got a soft counter or not.
Yeah, I don't. I know some people have used like Cole Haan, and they've done some collaborations with some like athletic type-esque, lasts in footwear to make it a little bit more comfortable for standing for long periods of times and walking. And I just don't know about the pressure on the back side there. I don't own them. I haven't held them.
I have a pair of Cole Haan.
I know that.
But
keep
going. Sorry. Yeah.
No.
You're going to leave us with that?
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
What's the deal over there?
We also want to learn too. Sharon has a great question.
I know a lot of people that use them and like them. So
yeah, I like my pair, but they definitely have a typical heel counter with no padding either. Yeah. So it's just, but that's just one pair. I just don't know enough about their whole line.
I know Echo does some stuff similar too, where they kind of will have more athletic-esque, lasts and constructions. But again, I don't know. I haven't held them. I haven't seen them. So.
Yeah.
Well, today,
I think that if this person can
formal shoes,
doctors of dress shoes. If anyone out there has them, send them. We'll try them.
Yeah, for real.
We'll review them. But
because I think it's a legitimate question, and I think just the whole dress shoe world in general is interesting. I think Zero is where my mind went as well. I have a pair that I throw on for work. Ultra has some models that are leather. I think that another company that I have never worn before, but I know that they have a more flexible upper design with a flexible heel counter, depending on how formal you need to go, is Allbirds, because they do some shoes that have very plain colors. And so if you can have like a white midsole, but just like a very plain upper, and that's how dressy they need to go. Right. But if it's like formal attire, I don't know Allbirds well enough to know, but they were on my mind of like, this is a relatively nice looking shoe that is very basic and simple. It doesn't look like a running shoe necessarily. They've got a lot of options. So that was another one that was in my head because a lot of their heels are very flexible and don't have anything that would be too irritable for Haglunds. So let's move on to our next question.
Really quick. Do you know that Allbirds actually is coming out with a minimal line of shoes? You know what they call them?
No birds.
Sunbirds.
I was thinking no birds.
All right, let's go. Sorry.
All right. Here comes in a similar vein. Doug has another question for us. It says,
just to tag on to that horrible joke. They have a seasonal lineup called Snowbirds. Anyways, keep going.
I think that we have some tired folks on the podcast tonight.
For those of you who don't know, we record on Sunday, which weekends are actually usually pretty busy for most of us. Cause I know for me, that's when I got a lot of PhD work done. I'm working on a bunch of academic stuff right now. And Nathan, I'm sure, is the same. And then David hammers super intense long runs on Sunday. So we get a little goofy.
Yeah. We're going to be okay. We'll this, okay. Everybody. Let's move to Doug's question. He says, DOR gang, how do you think about recovery footwear and how it relates to foot strength, not only after a run, but more generally? Do you always wear recovery sandals? Do you ever walk around barefoot? Do you walk around in zero drop shoes? How do you choose between types and what elements of recovery shoe design that really matters? This is kind of a broad question about our perspectives on recovery footwear. So what do y'all think?
Yeah, it's such a tricky one because I don't think we really have much data to back like recovery slides and footwear up with actual recovery, at least at this moment. But I hate to do this, but I feel like it does kind of boil down to some comfort there to some degree. If it feels good on your foot, you like standing on it, you like walking on it. It's cozy, like a cozy slide, that RIP. But I'm just going to keep that plug out there. Save the cozy slide. But that's I just love standing and walking around in that shoe, But truth be told, if I'm at my place, I walk around barefoot most of the time. My foot's kind of bugging me a little bit right now. So that's why I have the slides with me. But, and sometimes that little bit of structure, like this one has kind of like that 5-layer foam where it has a couple softer layers and then a couple like harder, more dense layers. And so you still get that structured feel while like being on a softer platform. I like that with these Deckers Cozy slides, but, just finding a feel that works for you. Honestly, I just don't know enough as far as from a data standpoint to truly give a for or against on them.
I think that there's a few things that we have some information about. Some of the information is regarding the philosophy of very soft recovery footwear. The philosophy, for some companies, is that create a very soft platform, which causes the muscles of the feet to do small contractions and lead to an increase of blood flow by contracting muscles, which squeezes blood vessels and moves blood through the foot. There's really nothing to back that up as a viable option for improving recovery. But just to throw that out there, that's kind of one of the running philosophies for recovery slides and footwear. What we also have some information on is what barefoot walking does for the muscles of your foot and the bones of your feet. And if you progressively are utilizing barefoot walking, barefoot shoes in a measured way that isn't going to overload your tissues, it can lead to hypertrophy of your intrinsic foot muscles, so the muscles that are inside of your foot originate and end in your foot, and it can help with bone density overall if you're doing it in, again, the right way. And because of that, I tend to, when I can, use barefoot shoes at work. I also like to walk around barefoot at home. And at the exact same time, I am wearing my RIP Sniper mids from Deckers X Lab because they are warm and it's getting cold at night around here. We're dipping down into the 30s this week at night.
That ain't cold.
And
that ain't cold.
It really is.
It's not cold.
Says the guy from Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
I don't know. We said 30 was cold on a pod. Someone was like, "That's not cold." So that person.
It's not. I agree. I agree. In winter, we're getting there. Anyway,
Winter's
I'm wearing them right now. They're warm, and also like as I've been dealing with irritation on the bottom of my foot, or like if I just had a really hard workout or just a really hard run, and my feet are a little bit tender because of like the work they got. I do like having cushioning under my foot. I don't think there's anything special about the recovery footwear that's out there. You just need something that would provide cushioning so that or that you don't need that. But if your foot is irritated, putting the little bit of cushioning under there temporarily will feel great. And then you can have that under your foot and allow it to just feel nice and cozy as you're going through the rest of your day. So I think that the use of recovery footwear for myself is spot checked when I need it for comfort or my feet are cold based on the ones that I have. And then otherwise, I love being able to be barefoot when I can, or wearing those at work too. Matt, what do you think?
I would definitely agree with both David and Nathan that use it for what you need at that moment. So I'm very similar to Nathan in that I'm pretty much always walking around. Right now, I walk around in one of the Innovate shoes that was sent to me that's pretty minimal and really comfortable. It has a wide toe box and I can feel the ground. But the other company that I use all the time is the Zero shoes, all leather, that I absolutely love because it allows me to be formal, but still I prefer being barefoot all the time. And part of that's also too, because I think we spend right now, especially spend so much time in these massive maximal shoes that the rest of the day I'm just craving the ground and want to make sure I balance that stuff out. I'm sure if I probably was running in minimal shoes, I'd probably want something more cushioned. So figure out what you need. If you have the opportunity to walk around in a more minimal zero drop shoe or whatever you can tolerate, great. You can build some great strength in your intrinsic strength. They use that term frequently, but I don't know if people actually measure strength, that you can increase the size and hypertrophy of your foot and ankle, your foot muscles, and potentially work them a little bit better by walking around and utilize them in a semi-barefoot state. And that's where I prefer to be. But if you have other needs, like something's a little sore or you need to unload your ankle, there's no reason to not take another running shoe or another shoe that has a little more cushioning or rocker or what have you. So it really depends on what you need and what your goals are. I think the phrase recovery is challenging because each person's going to have a different view of what that means and what feels most comfortable to them. So I'd say focus on that comfort thing.
Well, I think all we've learned through this is that we need to continue to campaign for Deckers to bring back their cozy line because they're so cozy. Although it's not. Anyway, yes, so cozy.
Bring back the cozy line. Bring it back.
We're going to move forward. This is a question from Chris, who's asking about uphill running shoes. So this person is going to be running a race that I'm going to just read what they wrote about the race. So I have a question for you on shoe choice for running the Point to Pinnacle half marathon in Australia this November. The event is billed as, quote, the world's toughest road half marathon. It starts at sea level and runs uphill 100% of the way to the top of Kunyani Mount Wellington, which overlooks the city of Hobart. The elevation gain is 1,271 meters, or just over 4,000 feet on the half marathon course, with 2/3 of that elevation gain coming in the second half of the race. So it's completely on sealed road surface, no trail. It's just a road uphill race. So they're kind of wondering what are the considerations for what sort of combination of shoe mechanics would be good for running uphill. Just to tell you what they've been running in, they do all of their long run, easy run training in the ASICS Super Blast 2 with faster workouts and local Saturday morning park run in the Hoka Mach 6. They're thinking of using the Super Blast for the half marathon, giving the comfort factor and the thick stack of reasonably lightweight foam. So they want to know what sort of combination do you think is beneficial for uphill running?
Yeah, it's actually, it's kind of crazy. Just a little slightly off topic, but within the realm of the question. So the race kind of died off a little after COVID. I don't think they've officially held it. They've tried to, but they can't get city permits, I think is the holdup. But we had a race here called Pier to Peak where you start at the coast, and Lacumba Peak is give or take 4,300, I think. So you go up 13.1, and with 4,000 feet. So we have one here that's like almost a mirror image with all of it being in the second half. Yeah, when you go up Gibraltar and up onto Camino Cielo. So that's kind of a fun little tidbit. Yeah. No, that sounds awful. Like I wouldn't do it. It's just maybe for the novelty of just doing it, but I don't know if I'd race it, but, I don't know. It's a tough one. Again, like I think going to comfort, like personally for me, if you're going up something that steep, I actually don't like it being that stiff. I feel like the rockers get in the way a little bit when I'm trying to climb and push off my forefoot. So I actually like a little bit of flexibility. With that said, if it's a really flexible shoe and I'm just hyperextending my toes the entire climb, that doesn't feel comfortable either. So kind of like something right in the middle where it has some flexibility under load, but it's not something that I immediately am like, oh, that's really flexible. Yeah. So finding a shoe that kind of coincides with that, I wouldn't choose any super shoe for that. I think I genuinely would probably go with a lighter weight trainer. The Mach actually sounds like a pretty decent option for that. But again, that is if you can tolerate it for that distance under that load, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're struggling at 10K, don't take it 13.1 on a 4,000 foot climb. So it's just a matter of finding a shoe that you feel comfortable with. And honestly, the Super Blast isn't a bad choice if you already like it. Like, honestly, I just stick with that. I don't know if I'd really rock the boat, but just finding a shoe that works for your mechanics for climbing and try it climbing. Like if you have access to hills, I don't know how close you are to that race if you live locally or you have to travel for it, but if you're able to get some steep climbs in, find the type of footwear design that works the best for you and be like, okay, well, that one kind of works for me. Let's find things that are in that bubble, versus like, okay, that really didn't work for me. And then now you're not finding that out on race day just because of, a decision you just made on the spot.
I think when I thought about this question and I tried to answer it for how I personally would go and approach picking a shoe for this, I got really excited about thinking about the geometry. So when you're running uphill, that puts you in whatever shoe you're in. If you're just standing there still, the resting static drop of the shoe is going to be lower because you're going to have a lower heel starting position. So when it comes to drop, if depending on where you're at with your shoe use and what you like, a slightly higher drop shoe probably wouldn't hurt you in this instance because it would probably keep it on a flat surface. It would keep it more similar and neutral with what you were used to on more flat stuff. And then at the same time, if you are using a shoe that had some sort of rocker, I would very highly recommend an earlier stage rocker to help you get up onto the toe earlier. Because if you have a much later stage rocker, like if you were thinking super shoe and you wanted to take out something like the Endorphin Elite, I think that would be a recipe for disaster because it's so late in the game that you wouldn't be able to get onto that rocker unless you like land really, really far forward, because then you would just land on that rocker. But in my mind, an earlier starting rocker position, which the Super Blast and the Mach both have an earlier stage rocker. So I think those both actually fit that bill. But I also thought about shoes like the Endorphin Speed because that has 8mm drop. It's got an earlier stage rocker. It's got a little bit of flexibility, but not too much. It's lightweight. And if it's comfortable for you, something like that could end up working out really well. But I don't mind the idea of having higher drop, little bit of a rocker, toe spring. I probably wouldn't go that way because you're going to be, like David said, sitting into extension like the whole way up anyway because you're climbing. So if you're sitting there at the more calm areas too, I don't think that's the best thing in the world. And in terms of stack, I think that's where comfort comes in more so than a specific stack height being better than another. What do you think, Matt?
I totally agree with both of you. I think having the higher drop, and I struggled to think about this, higher drop, early rocker. And the problem is there's not a lot of racing shoes anymore that have a higher drop. I think like 8mm is usually kind of the peak of where they go. So that kind of limits us a little bit unless you start thinking about some of the lightweight trainers, but most of them still are 8, maybe 10 max. So not as high as they used to be. So speed is definitely a really good option. I didn't think about that in terms of, it's got a non-carbon plate. It's what type of plate does that have? Did I remember?
PBX.
It's PBX.
Yeah.
It's like a plastic.
Yeah, it's like plastic plate. So it's still got a little bit. So, and that shoe turns over really nicely. 8mm drop feels really good. The reason the speed make me think about this is I am the psycho that actually thinks this race is a great idea because I love uphill workouts and uphill tempo runs.
Races.
I love climbing. My wife knows this.
You like
she hates
climbing
it.
races.
Climbing, yeah. Climbing stuff is like uphill tempo runs are my favorite thing because they're like, I feel like my heart's going to explode. But I think when I'm reading this, given the challenge of the race, my gut instinct is to stick with what you've been training in. And the Super Blast, I totally agree, is a great option. You're comfortable with, you know it. If you're not looking to do like some kind of smashing a PR, when in doubt, if something's that intense, I would go with what you've been training in and what you're most comfortable in, to be honest, and not try to change things. I know it's in November. So by the time this episode comes out, it's going to be 2 weeks left. So I would stick with the Super Blast, unless you just happen to have found in the meantime something that's also higher drop, earlier rocker, and is really, really comfortable for you. But I would stick with what you know personally.
I totally agree. Totally agree with sticking with what you know.
I would say if I was racing at RIP, but not because they ended the line still exists. It's just a different shoe. But Puma Deviate Nitro Elite version 1 would probably be my choice for a race like that, for me personally. It's carbon plated, but that's a more flexible plate up front, a little bit higher drop, not quite as high stack, more natural feel to it. That would be my pick. That or the Endorphin Speed would probably be what I would pick for myself if I was to race Pure to Peak, which is the one here, the equivalent.
I literally was about to say not Elite, but the Deviate Nitro 3.
Well, that probably would be the
That's the one I was going to say.
Yeah, in the modern day, yeah. Quote unquote modern day, like fast forward 2 years.
Right. So outdated. That was actually just a quick side. When I posted our first video on the first Deviate Nitro Elite, and Molly Seidel shared it on her Instagram. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the craziest thing ever. Fanboy moment.
Yeah.
Fanboy moment for sure.
We still need to get her on the podcast. I wonder if she'd come on.
I think that she would have so many valuable things to say to the conversations that we enter into about injury and kind of rehab and stuff. But
for sure.
Yeah, we'll see if that works out. If anyone knows Molly and know that she'd want to come talk about that stuff, hook us up. All right.
Molly, if you listen, we love you. We'd love you to have you on the podcast.
All right. Our final question for the night from Christine, asking on Instagram. They say, hi, do you have thoughts on shoes that may push pressure away from the upper hamstring? I have referred pain in that area from a rare mass under my tailbone, and I'm trying to find a shoe that will alleviate some of the pressure for my upcoming marathon.
Can I jump on this?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah,
totally.
So it's interesting. I'm talking with a friend of mine right now about this, and what I'm about to say, we don't really have enough research or data to talk about this. But there's been some small trends in injury that's been noticeable over the last couple of years with the introduction of these super stack, super shoe type things, and these super rockered shoes. So we know that higher stack height rockered shoes tend to shift loads from the foot and ankle away from there up to the knee and hip. And some of my physician buddies, and I don't know if there's any bias behind this, starting to notice that we're seeing a lot more sacral and femoral stress fractures, which normally are very rare. And usually there's some kind of, there's like a nutrient deficiency going on and some other things going on, but now they're seeing them much more commonly. And the question is going like, hey, is there any relationship between these types of footwears and increasing stuff up there? There's also been an interesting increase in the number of hamstring things going on because your stride gets lengthened. There's more pressure at the hip extensors. So again, I have no research to back this up, just kind of testimonial things going, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if there's anything to this or if we're just seeing this and it's just random. So that said, though, I think using a type of shoe that may not be as high stack or not as rockered may be a little better if shifting load and forces down toward the foot and ankle may be helpful, and potentially avoiding the really rockered tall shoes that take stuff away from the ankle might be something to think about. Not necessarily running barefoot, but there's still some options that we've talked about, like the Innovate Roadfly is a shoe I'm really enjoying right now that they sent us. I know it's just second time I've talked about Innovate, but it's a more moderate to lower stack height, but decently cushioned road trainer that's been really actually pretty awesome. I've been very surprised and how durable it is. But something like maybe even a Convara or some other things that maybe aren't the tallest thing in the world and still have a little flexibility to them might be something to consider if that's comfortable. What do you two think?
Yeah, that or just meeting in the middle and doing something maybe like your traditional high drop trainer. I mean, doing something like a Brooks Ghost or a Mizuno Rider where you do kind of still get that lift where the calf in theory, can kind of get unloaded a little bit, but not generating that early heel rise quite as much that you see in these sharper rockered shoes, especially with those like real sharp late stage rockers. Like you mentioned the Endorphin Elite, like that would light a hamstring right up if you don't, if you have a sensitive one. So that way you still have a little bit more structure on your foot. You know, you don't necessarily have to lean minimal per se, but just something that isn't quite as dramatic on the rocker experience.
Yeah, those rockers really lengthen out the stride for sure. David?
No, I have nothing to add. I think that I agree with what y'all said. Well, we should probably wrap things up because in 7 minutes the Cowboys are kicking off, and David is a Cowboys fan,
really?
and he's it must have got delayed.
Kicking off and stuff. I did see it got delayed, but that's a long delay.
Yeah, it got delayed. So lucky
I thought I was about to be hopping in the second half. I get to watch this thing. Let's go.
You get to watch the whole thing. So we are going to sign off. If you have not already, we would love if you would take the time, a couple minutes, just to leave a review of the podcast. That helps the podcast grow and reach more people. Oh, we have a guest. Oh, hello, Isabella. How are you tonight, honey?
She's trying to figure out where mom went. She's like,
what is going on?
Hi, Isabella.
Hi.
Do you have heel bevel?
Well, this is the best way to finish up the show. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you next time.